Look, when it comes to this issue, I'll tell you this. There's nobody else I look for, okay, in regards to Christians responding to these things. And it's not necessarily just Hebrew Israelites, but I also put in there like Kemetic kind of religions or worldviews, this kind of idea of going back to the religions of the ancestors and stuff, which I think exists in a lot of cultures. But you're the guy who does this, man. Yeah.
Well, a little bit, I mean, fortunately, since you mentioned last time we talked, there's so many people who actually have, taken up the challenge and gotten into this. And there's a lot more people now that cover it, fortunately. And it's beautiful to see. And there's now people, on all kinds of different social media platforms from, they're obviously YouTube, but you see more and more people on all the other ones, including things like Clubhouse, for example, and TikTok, and a lot of times it's different people in those different places. So there's definitely a lot more of us dealing with this issue than last time we talked, which is an awesome thing that's very encouraging, so I'm glad to just be part of it, really.
I call this an update on Hebrew Israelites and Kemetic religions. So I'm going to let you guide it in regards to what's going on within these movements.
Well, when we talk about the Kemetic folks, those are the folks who are part of the conscious community, and the conscious community is this mindset or mentality that I'm awakened, and usually it's to something that's considered native or indigenous to the adherent in some way. And in this specific context, it's African spiritualities. And so the Kemetic folks don't agree on much themselves, but a lot of times they'll agree on some basic things. White man bad, Christianity bad, some form of ancient African spirituality or mentality about life good. And there are various places, and they usually don't travel like in groups or pairs in the same way Hebrew Israelites do. It's usually one teacher with a following, and then the next teacher over here with a following. So young Pharaoh over here, Polite over here, Sarah Sutanseti over here, and then there's the OGs like Phil Valentine and these guys. Well, before, you'd have to watch old VHS tapes and stuff like that. Now, obviously, they're all over YouTube and places like that. And sometimes some of the lingo will sound similar to like 5%ers, which is an offshoot of the Nation of Islam, which is an offshoot of Orthodox Islam and Christianity and Black nationalism. But they're not 5%ers, although 5%ers are often considered members of the conscious community. They're not Kemetic usually per se. But the Kemetic cats, they emphasize something often to do with Egypt in some way. One of the more prominent guys is Brother Jabari. He has a book out called 7 White Lies. He debated Vince Bantu, and he's an interesting guy to listen to. I've met him a few times, and he takes it serious, it seems, at some level as far as a mystical understanding of reality. Some of the guys, though, essentially seem to be what you might call Nile Valley atheists. What I mean by that is they're atheists, but it's an Afrocentric atheism, so it'll manifest itself like this. No God exists, but the principles of reality that were laid out and articulated in ancient Egypt, they match reality. And so the gods are like signs or symbols or avatars, ideological avatars. I don't mean literal avatars, sort of like ideological avatars, so to speak, of principles of reality relating to mathematics and science and logic, if that makes sense. So it's essentially an atheism using Kemet as sort of a blanket, but they're not really adhering to any ancient Egyptian spirituality at that point, of course, but they give lip service to it in a way.
Does this regularly lead to some form of, I'm going to say racism, and I'm going to qualify it, okay? But maybe nationalism might be the better term. This, hey, our people had this first, we're somehow better, and then the forces have been against us to like suppress our intelligence and what we've given to the world. Like, we're the origins of all these things.
Definitely.
Superiority maybe is the best word to use.
Yeah, so sometimes scholars who deal with Afrocentric views of history that are sort of overzealous. So there's a difference between almost like whitewashing or blackwashing history. And obviously the more powerful and more common that we're aware of is whitewashing things, minimizing black contribution or non-white contribution, et cetera, things like that. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. But then you can essentially go the other way, and some of these guys do, which is basically almost everything came out of Africa is kind of the overarching thesis a lot of times. So, you'll say amen, and they'll say, oh, that ties to the god Amun-Ra, and they go on some linguistic goose chase that basically is just based upon the words sounding similar. And then they'll say, gotcha with that. And then whether it's Greek philosophy, whether it's the university, you name it, in some way it came out of usually Egypt. Usually that's the place that they'll go to. That's why it's called Kemet, because Kemet's an ancient word for Egypt. So there have been some scholars who deal with this. I think one of the most well-known books, she's a female scholar, something Witts, I forgot the last name, Mary, but I think it's called Not Out of Africa. Now there's other ones as well. That's kind of the more well-known one. And they deal with another work called Black Athena. So this stuff is kind of older, and academia is a little bit more aware of it. And sometimes some of these Afrocentric folks who prop themselves up as scholars of learning, sometimes they'll get a degree or two here that's legit. Sometimes they don't, and they fake it. But sometimes they end up in real places. What I mean is being chairs of departments of African studies or places like that. This does happen sometimes. And then you'll have a guy who's really on the verge between legitimate scholarship and being pseudo, and yet he's teaching somewhere for real. This has been documented. This has happened. Now, Hebrew Israelites don't have anything like that happen, and for the most part, they have a different way they infiltrate. It's usually through the church. But some of this has happened at the university level when you talk about Kemet. But we're in a different era. Kemet's really I feel like it's in a free-for-all right now because one of the main guys, Polite, is in some serious legal trouble. He's facing some very extreme accusations, and it's going to trial. And it's not like everyone there follows him, but he was like the guy who kind of crossed over with mainstream appeal. Now, of course, because of that, a lot of people looked at him as a sellout, but he kind of showed you can be successful touting these ideas. But now he's in some serious legal trouble.
You know what the interesting is?
Yeah.
Okay, the stuff for me is like all of these things exist in the Armenian community.
Really?
Every single one of them you're saying exists in the Armenian community, except replace Kemet with Armenia. And replace the mathematics. I'll give you an example. I was supposed to debate a guy. And it never happened. I ended up on the podcast. We were supposed to debate God's existence. He claims that Mithraism originates in Armenia, and which maybe potentially. I mean, I'm not necessarily against that idea.
I mean, if you want to be proud of that, sure.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, some people think it's because the only kind of understanding of Mithraism we have is of the Roman version, but a lot of people think it's a Persian kind of originated thing. Some think it's Indian.
That's what I heard. What's that's why he's portrayed with the, how do you say it, Phrygian cap?
Yeah, the little weird thing.
Yeah, PHY, yeah.
Which is fine, but his claims are, again, typical of some folks, is that, the Christ story and Jesus stolen from Mithras and all that stuff.
Right.
So we're supposed to debate some of this stuff. This guy who has a doctorate in a completely different area.
Oh, right.
Right, it's completely different subject. But he's sort of a self-proclaimed Armenianologist. And it's not that everything he says is wrong. There's quite a bit of historical stuff that he says is right. Linguistic similarities to groups of people in the Basque in Spain. And I know people who were legitimate Armenianologists and linguists of Armenians who've made these similar connections and written books on it. As a matter of fact, I have a friend whose father was an expert on this, written a lot of books in Armenian on this subject. But like they'll use these things and then go, see, told you all this stuff. Like mathematics originated in Armenia. And then you can find exactly the same stuff when it comes to the African versions of these things, right?
Right.
But they all exist. So it's laughable to me is because I think people who tend to be like displaced and have and somehow people have tried to wipe them out or enslave them or genocide. some sort of a disconnect with the ancestry, tend to elevate some of these things if they're not biblically grounded and sound in regards to theology properly, will pursue ethnic ideas of this sort because it places them historically and gives them kind of a value and a meaning and all that stuff. That's kind of my sociological commentary on this, but I see it all over the place.
Right. Yeah, you know, that one thing you said, like the Christ story, this and that, like one of the famous books that a lot of these Kemetic guys will use is called Christianity Before Christ, you know, and it's got that kind of thesis going on. And so, yeah, you do see that a lot. And I mean, everybody wants to take credit for the Jesus story, except for letting God have the credit. Yeah, everyone gets to be the originator except for God himself.
I know.
But yeah.
How do black women fit into Kemetic theology or Kemetic doctrine or whatever the word is, Kemetic ideology and Egyptologists? How does a black woman fit in, or what's her role in this whole thought process?
Some in the Kemetic community view the black woman as being a god. So there's a very prevalent and popular phrase, the black woman is God. They think that they're gods. They think that everything is deity and that we are gods, not the concept of God that, generally we understand God to be. But the idea is that some people believe that at one point in time, only black women existed on the planet. Someone like Young Pharaoh, which is where I first came in contact with this idea, he believes that women came from the extraterrestrial plane to the earth.